Hello, everybody. Welcome back. How's everybody doing? I'm sure you guys are feeling much better. Yes, folks. Look at this section. What we're going to be looking at is actually installing Active Directory. We're about to get through the installation of Active Directory. Now, when I say installation of Active Directory, I am not talking about just installing the role and promoting the server to a domain controller. I am going to show you the proper way of setting up Active Directory, which means I must configure DNS first. For this lab, I don't need my client machines. So look at this. I'm going to suspend 10.1 just to let you know. So you can see with just the two servers right now. So the only thing that I have is actually server 1 and server 2. Those are the only ones I have, right? Now, look, why do I need DNS? Now, think about it. Based on the first section, that when we gave you an actual intro, Active Directory is a centralized server that has, a database. And what's in that database? Users, groups, computers, organizational units, resources, printers, everything. Once I install Active Directory on a server, it's actually called a domain controller. If it's not hosting Active Directory, it's either a standalone server or a member server. And we'll see the difference between all of them. Right now, if I check my first server, it's Mercury, standalone server. That's what it is. You know what's another way to check? If I go to tools and I go to computer management and I check my actual shares, I don't see there's one of them that is called the sysvol. It's not over here in the list. So once you host Active Directory on a server, you'll see the sysvol. I could also do this from the command prompt, which means I could use the net share command. The net is a very popular command line. See this? And I don't see the actual sysvol itself. If I do net space slash question mark, I can see everything about the net command. I just did the net share, for example, right? That's what I did. So I don't see the sysvol, which means it's not hosting Active Directory. Okay. It doesn't mean you have to go to tools. And if you see Active Directory here, that means it's hosting Active Directory. No, it's not. My first thing is to prepare for the installation of Active Directory, which means I have to configure DNS. If I want to configure DNS, I'm actually looking for what? What does DNS do? Remember from the beginning of section 1, resolves a fully qualified domain name to and from an IP address. What's an example of a fully qualified domain like www .google.com is a fully qualified domain name. If I say W2019-1, this is just the host name, a fully qualified domain name is like dot, and then I could say an actual example of a domain name. I like to use .local so nobody can reach me from the outside, but I can connect from the inside to the outside. Let's say, for example, Udemy, right? Dot local, just like this. This is a fully qualified domain name. You see that? The computer name is W2019 dash what? And then the domain name is Udemy uh, dot local. That's a domain name. Altogether is a fully qualified domain name, as you see. That's what I see over here. This is like the name of the company, all right? I rather use dot local or dot inside, but this is a fully qualified domain name. If you notice, if I go to my first server, I don't have a fully qualified domain name, even though it's actually in a workgroup. DNS will be covered in details like towards the end, but for now, I'm trying to set up an actual domain, which means I'm trying to set up my first domain. My first server is going to be hosting Active Directory, which means I'm setting up, remember from section 1, it's a parent domain. The first tree domain, it's the first forest, right? So that's what we're actually setting up. So what I'm going to do is the proper method is this way change more. I'm going to append a DNS suffix. So I'm going to make this, I'm going to be putting the actual fully qualified domain name, right? Fully qualified domain name of the organization. So Udemy.local, let's say, all right? Udemy.local. Look at this. Then when I click OK, I have a fully qualified domain name right over here. See that? Fully qualified domain name. Then I'm going to click OK, then OK, close and restart. And I'm going to do the same thing on my second server. The reason why I need two servers, I like to have backup redundancy in case one domain controller fails. I have another one up and running. Remember, once you install Active Directory on a server, it's actually called a domain controller, right? So I'm going to go ahead over here, change. and append the suffix over here, which is Udemy dot local, of course. So I'm doing the same thing, what I did on the first server. See that? Now it's a fully qualified domain. It's still on a workgroup. It's a standalone server, right? This is a standalone server. Now look, I'm gonna go back to my first server. And there we go. Let me just go ahead and log on and put the password. And it should populate server manager. Can I ping a fully qualified domain name right now? Of course not, because I don't have DNS configured or installed at all. So let me test that. Let me show you what I mean. So if I say, let me ping, this is server one, as you see, W2019-2, right? I could reach it by a host name or a NetBIOS name. But if I say dot Udemy, dot what? Local, which is a fully qualified domain name, it says I can't find it. This is looking for a DNS server, and I don't have a DNS server yet configured. So I need that prior of installing Active Directory on the server, right? So if I go to manage, this is server one, add roles and features, and go next. Role base, it's an actual role. So the first role, look at this. This is my IP, my fully qualified domain name. It's a standard edition evaluation, and I'm setting up DNS. So I don't do Active Directory at the beginning. This is a mistake. If you check any article online, everybody tries to say, let's do Active Directory and DNS will get installed with it. No, I want to do it the proper way. So DNS server, next, next, and install. So my first goal is to set up DNS before I set up actually Active Directory. So now it's installing the role. And of course, I have to create a zone and make sure the records are there. But as I said, towards the end, we will be covering DNS in depth. So you'll actually see that in action. So you see, it tells me installation started on W2019-1.udemy.local. I'm not going to put DNS on the second server yet. I'm just posting DNS on the first server, as you see. All right, just on the first server for now. That's what I'm actually doing. It's not going to take long. This is actually going to be quite fast. And once I open DNS, I'm not going to see any records. There's really nothing there. You see, look how fast it is. So I have to create a zone, which is an actual area. It's like a namespace, which is the name of your domain. The name of the first domain, which is your parent domain, udemy.local. Think about it as cisco.com, microsoft.com, right? The first domain, the name of the company. Normally, you always have a parent domain. And I'm going to be setting up a replica on the second server, guys. So I'm planning to make this server as a domain controller, promoting the server to a domain controller. At the moment, it's a standalone server, as you see, and we actually verify that it's on a work group, and I don't have the sysvol, which sysvol contains the policies, the group policy objects, and we'll see that in more details. But that's like a hint. Oh, I don't have Active Directory. That's one of the hints. Let me close. If I check over here, I still can't. Why? Because I need to go to tools, DNS. You see this, guys? And look at a forward lookup zone. We'll see this in more details, but a forward lookup zone resolves like names to IPs. The reverse does the opposite, IPs to names. So I'm going to right click, new zone, go next, primary zone, next, and call this what? Udemy.local. All right. There we go. Create a new zone, and resource records should be updates automatically. Then click on finish over here, and let's take a look and see the zone itself. Now, there is something that I need to actually modify, and you'll see what I'm actually talking about over here when it comes up to modification. But look, udemy.local primary forward, and there's a file. This is actually the database of DNS. Now, where's the database? Of course, that's going to be under my system 32 direct. Remember, server 2 does not have DNS, so this actually looks good over here. That's what I'm actually looking for, the DNS server itself, just for actually initial configuration and nothing actually extra. So let me go ahead and click on finish. While we're waiting for that, I want to show you something on my second server. Second server does not have DNS. So remember, look at this. My second server does not have DNS. I'm not going to install DNS on the second server yet. Nobody can reach anything by a fully qualified domain. Let me just show you my server manager over here so you actually can see. And it should show me on the left-hand side if it has DNS or not. So the role is not actually installed over here. See that? Let me just refresh to show you it's only with these default ones, so nothing here. It looks like it froze. These things happen with a virtual machine. It's good that it's happening with us here. Let me do this. Power and restart guest, just to show you. So sometimes, yes, this does actually happen. It's good to have trouble while we're actually in the class together, right? So let's wait for it and see. Let's give it a few moments and see what's going on. So virtual machines, yes, they do tend sometimes issues arise with the virtual machines, just like the way you would have it in a real organization, right? So we're going to see what's actually happening with this actual machine itself. Let's take a look. It looks like it's loading. Let's see. Full screen. Is it doing something? There you go. All right. It looks like it just got stuck for a moment, right? So these things happen. So if it happens, do not panic. Just reset the virtual machine, right? That's what you want to do. So I'm waiting for the log on screen. It should go up so quick. I mean, it's not going to be an actual issue over here. So this should be actually fine. Let's give it a few more seconds and I should be able to get to the logon screen itself. I'd rather have trouble while we're doing this so you could see in a real environment how we could actually avoid. Of course, in a real environment, you'll still be virtualizing, but you'll probably using Hyper-V or the actual VMware server itself. That's what you'll be actually using, the actual VMware server, which is a vSphere or ESXi server. That's what you'll be actually using. This is just the player where we do it for testing. That's what we use the player for. So let's see if this actually comes up and populates for us. It looks like it's taking longer than what's actually intended, right? Uh, let's see. There you go. It's actually going right now. It's going. So these things actually do happen on virtual machines, as I said earlier. Okay, good. This is a good sign. That means I'm going to actually see it. Let me just do a full screen over here. I want to see if my DNS is actually still installed or not, right? That's what I want to see if my DNS is still installed or not. So this is a good sign. That means it didn't actually crash. So let me just go ahead and log on over here to my server and check my DNS server. Probably the zone is there. It just like froze for a moment, right? These things actually happen. So let's give it a few seconds and see over here. So server manager should get populated right now, right? So let's wait for server manager. And if I see DNS here, that's a good sign because I did host DNS on the server itself. So let me give this a moment and see how it actually works. So it should populate. There you go. It's good. Well, let me open DNS and see if the zone is there. The zone is not there. So let me do a new zone next primary. First time I do this, and I'm going to say Udemy dot local, right? Next, allow for dynamic updates and finish. There you go. Now I see it. But look at the IP address. This is perfect. This is good. Okay, so I do see the A record. I can see the server that is hosting the zone. Starter authority keeps track of how many times the zone gets modified. I'm going to be explaining this in more details in the DNS section. But for me to reach somebody by name, I have to have an A record. So if I go to my second server, pay good attention, guys. This is important, folks. Watch this. So let me open here, command prompt. This is my second server, good for troubleshooting. And let me just change the fonts over here. 36 is fine. Colors green, so everybody can see better and CLS. So if I try to ping W2019-2 dot Udemy dot local, look, it's pinging the loop back. This is version 6, but look, I'm testing it with my own, so it's pinging the loop back. All right, let me try actually server 1, the one that we should be trying. So pinging yourself fully qualified is good. Oh, it can't find it. Why? Look, let me show you why. If I check my properties over here, my DNS is pointing to my wireless router. My wireless router has no clue about udemy.local. So I have to change it to my first server, 128. Watch this now. Then, okay. If I try one more time, oh, it's working. Don't you see? Isn't that amazing? The way you could fix problems just like that. Perfect. And I ping from server one to server two, fully qualified, right? Well, server one should be pointing to itself for DNS then, because that's where Udemy.local is actually hosted. So watch this. Let me check. It's 128. I bet you it's actually pointing to my wireless router. There you go. It should be pointing to itself. See that? This is important. That's what you would do in an actual organization. And let me go ahead and see if I could reach my second server fully qualified. Ping W2019 2 dot udemy dot local. I can't. Why? I don't have an A record for W2019 too. Look, this is my second server. I don't have an A record for this server here. Okay, so check this out. This server, there's no A record in the DNS server, in the zone. It's not actually there. Let me show you. So if I check my DNS on server one, watch this. I don't see the record there. I can see the record for server one, but I don't see the record for server two. I could right click and create the host record manually, but no, I don't do that. I want it to register automatically. So what I could do is in the command prompt, I could run an actual command called ipconfig slash register DNS. And look, watch. Look how this is actually going to work for us. And there you go. It sends a registration. Okay, let me see if I did it well over here. And let's see if it generates over here. There you go. It's in the list. Okay, I showed you one is lowercase, one is upper. It doesn't really matter. So can I reach the second server fully qualified domain name? Let's see. Ping. I'm on server one, W 2019 dash two dot let's say Udemy dot local. There you go. I could reach fully qualified. Guess what, guys? My DNS server is configured. Everything is working. So we're actually done with this lecture here. And we'll see you guys in a moment when we actually set up our initial domain controller, our first server, which is going to be on server one. So that's what we're going to be actually doing. So we'll see you guys in a moment. Everybody later. Okay, folks. All right, folks, so let's continue. So we're still actually on section five. What I want to do in this section is I want to set up Active Directory on the first server. Remember, I don't have Active Directory yet. My server is a standalone server. So this is actually a standalone server. It's a work group. And I can prove that to you because look what it says here. It's a work group, all right? It doesn't say domain. Remember, there's a standalone server, there's a member server, and there's a domain controller. Right now, it's a standalone server. It's not hosting Active Directory. So if I want to check also, I could go to Tools, Computer Management, and from computer management, I could go to shared folders and shares. I don't see the sysvol. All right, that's one of them. I'm just giving you like one hint over here. Plus, this is not a domain controller because I have my local users and groups, which means this server has its own local user accounts, its own local groups. It has its own local policies and restrictions. I cannot control it from another server, which is a domain controller. Everything has to be managed locally, as you see. I want to create an actual local user here. So I'm going to call this, let's say, user one. And let me just put an actual complex password so I could follow the password policy. And you'll see why I'm actually doing this. And I'm going to create a group called group one. Watch this. GRP1. I'm going to add user one to the list over here and create it. I could also open the command prompt over here, right? Watch this. Command prompt. Let me just change fonts over here so we can see actually better. And the color to be the text green, as you see, right? And if I do, let me just look at a full screen here. So if I do net share, I could see I don't have the sysvol, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. But if I do net user, I can see the user that I created, which is user one. And if I do net space local group, right, I can see the group that I created, which is BRP1. That's local to the server itself. So it's not hosting Active Directory. This is my initial server that I'm going to be hosting Active Directory. So it's going to become a domain controller. So technically speaking, it's going to be a parent domain. The name of the domain is going to be called udemy.local. That's the name of the company. So the first domain that is established is a parent domain, and it's also called the forest domain. So I'm going to go to manage, add roles and features, next, 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 all right, and install the role Active Directory domain services. And go next and take the defaults. But look at this. It does a feature for me. And what is that? Look, it does group policy management. You see that? And it also installs the remote server administration tools. Look, if I go to tools, see group policy management, I don't see the RSAT. We'll see what the RSAT is. Look, that's how I could manage the components of Active Directory, which is like there's users and computers, there's domains and trust. Look, I could remove these, but look, all these are different snap-ins that I could actually manage. All right, so I'm going to leave the defaults and see what all this is actually about. So I'm going to go next, next, and install. So I am actually preparing for the installation of Active Directory. The first thing that I have to do is actually install the role itself, right? That's what I need to do, install the actual. I could actually minimize this, just refresh here, right? And I could see, this is my IP address 223.128. Remember, I had to switch to static, right? Let's just take a look at this again. Default gateway is 2, and DNS is actually pointing to myself, as you see, right? So let's take a look and see what's up with the role. It should almost be finished. This doesn't actually take it that much time. And it tells me what features are actually coming with this actual role itself. The ADS snap-in, which is the RSAT, right? And the group policy management, all those are going to be part of the package that we actually just are about to finish installing. So let's give this just a few moments and it should be done. Once it's done, look, I want to show you so you don't actually get confused if you see the term Active Directory users on computers, domains and trust, sites and services does not mean that I'm actually hosting Active Directory on the server. No, it doesn't, because that could just only be the RSAT, which is the remote server administration tools. And we'll see what's the role of the RSAT, what's the purpose of it, and what do I actually benefit from the RSAT itself. For now, it's done. So I could say promote the server to a domain controller, but I'm going to click on close. And look, there's a notification. I have to do something. All right. When I click on it's like, okay, well, you have to promote the server to a domain controller. Show you something. If I go to tools, oh, I see Active Directory, I see group policy. These are the features. So it doesn't mean it's a domain controller. If I try to open, it doesn't work. All right. See that? It doesn't work. It's not hosted yet. So I have to click here and promote the server to a domain controller. See, this is my first domain that I'm actually setting up, right? This is the first domain that I'm setting up over here. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So what I'm going to be doing is the following: adding a new forest, which is the first domain, which is a parent domain, which is actually the forest name and the name of the first tree itself. This option is like for backup. This is actually if I want to set up a different organization, like two companies merging. But of course, here I'm going to set up first at the beginning, add a new forest. And the name, of course, is Udemy. Watch this, local. And I'm going to go next. Is going to check on my network to see if somebody has udemy.local and nobody actually does. You see DNS is there, and there's something called a global catalog. We'll see what the RODC is, but look, a global catalog, there's two types for a domain control. It's either a global catalog server or a domain control, and we'll see the difference. Well, guess what? The first server that I set up must be a global catalog. I can tell you this about this. It's like the Yellow Pages. It has little information about everything. Every time that I log into a system, it requires a global catalog. Anytime that I do queries or searches, it looks for a global catalog. All right, so that's one thing to keep in mind. And look, forest function level, domain function level, we'll be talking about this. But look at this. It could be compatible with all the way back with 2008. We'll see the difference between the forest and the domain function level. For now, I'm going to leave it as it is, which means I could coexist with anything that is server 2016 and higher. And this is a password for restoring the database of Active Directory, which we'll be actually looking at, DSRM. So I'm going to put a password. We're going to be using this. And we'll show you how to reset this actual password. And I'm going to go next. Look at this. DNS is configured. I don't have to worry about anything. You see that? I did not get any error messages. Look, if I open my DNS, let me just show you. So I could see only have basic records. I don't have any records about Active Directory. See, it's limited, right? Start of authority member keeps track of how many times the zone got modified. You'll see there's going to be a big change over here, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. So let me just go back to the promotion and go next. and it's going to show me that this will only have Udemy because, in other words, there's no conflicts with other domains on my network. It's the first initial one. So that's what it's checking. So I'm going to go next, right? Give this a moment. And look, MTDS, that's the database of Active Directory. So how can I tell if a server has a domain, if it's hosting Active Directory or not? How can I tell if it's a server, it's a domain controller or not? I could go to the C drive. There's another hint, and I could check Windows, and I don't see the sysvol. See that? And here I don't see NTDS folder. No sysvol, no NTDS. All right. So that means it's not a domain controller. That's another way to actually uh, sysvol is where group policies are located at. And the NTDS, New Technology Directory Service, that's the database of Active Directory, which is really ntds.dit, directory information tree. We'll see more and more about that. It's really recommended to put it like on a separate hard drive, but for our testing, I'm going to leave it on the same. So I'm going to go next and next, give it a few seconds and see how this works. So it's checking to see if there's any errors or not, as you see. That's what it's checking right now. There you go. It looks like everything is actually fine. And I'm going to click on install. This should not take long, guys. Just to let you know, it's not going to take long. So here is the actual installation of Active Directory. So this is my initial server that is actually a domain controller, as you see, right? So once it's done, is going to require a restart. So once it restarts, this server right now will be called a domain controller because it's hosting Active Directory. So it does have a centralized database that is going to be controlling all types of resources that are actually part of the company itself in terms of users, groups, computers, organizational units, policies, printers, name it, anything is going to be stored in a centralized database itself. Right. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's all about to actually restart right now. So it looks like it's on the right track. Remember, the protocol that Active Directory uses is called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. It's a protocol that is used to authenticate to verify if you have the right username and the right password is actually Kerberos. So this server is also a Kerberos server that is going to be verifying the authentication, verifying the credentials if I have the right username and the right password. That's what it actually does, right? So this is what we want to verify. And another thing is also what I'm going to check my DNS server to show you how the DNS server actually looks like, right? Because there's going to be extra records in the DNS server itself once it's actually hosting Active Directory. This will take, I would say, a few minutes, not more than 5 minutes. The first time that the server hosts Active Directory will actually take a while to process just for the first time. So what I'm going to do is, look what it's going to do. It's going to be applying computer settings and all that. So I could actually pause the video and we'll actually continue with this in a moment. All right. So we'll actually be back in a moment, guys. All right, folks, let's take a look and see what actually happened with the server. So let's see over here. So look, here I'm back to my initial server. Let me just log on and look what it says. Udemy/administrator. So this is an actual domain right now, as you see. It's actually a domain controller. So the server is actually hosting Active Directory. This is actually good. Let me just show you how I could also tell that it's a domain controller. Imagine without a domain controller, how can a company actually survive? I don't have a centralized server that can manage all my computers, like in terms of creating user accounts, resetting passwords, unlocking accounts, disabling accounts, policies, restrictions, account settings. All this is done from my domain controller. So it makes everything easier to manage for a network administrator. Now look at this. On the left-hand side, I'm going to see ADDS, and I'm also going to see DNS. So that's just another thing to look into as you see, right? So let's give it a few seconds and you'll see right now it should actually be in the list. It's just refreshing the actual roles at the moment. And I'm going to prove to you that yes, this is actually a domain control. Look at this. This is perfect. First of all, if I go to tools, watch, remember this computer management, I no longer have local users and groups because it's a domain controller. I go to shared folders and shares. I see the sysvol and also another thing, which is the net logon. That means it's a domain controller. Or I could have done this from the command prompt and I could see net here. I could see that it's a domain controller because I have the sysvol. Another thing I could check and see over here is the following. Under my C drive, Windows, I should see an NTDS folder. It's hosting Active Directory, right? And here is the sysvol, where all the group policies are actually stored. So this is a domain controller, as you see. When I go to local server and I click on the computer name, see, it says domain right now. See that? It says domain. But when I click on the computer name and I click on change, it tells me this is a domain controller, right? Another thing, what are the consoles? We're going to see each one in details. I'm going to go to the most common one, which is Active Directory users and computers. So I'm going to open that. That's where I could manage my user accounts and groups and computers. If I expand the domain, I could see when I go to domain control, this is actually an organizational unit. We'll see the difference between containers and organizational units, and that's the server that I'm connected to. And it's actually a global catalog server. That means it could process logons and query searches. Remember, it's either a GC or a DC. But if I go to users, well, there you go. So user one got migrated. And look, the group got migrated too. You see that? So, this is where I could be controlling all my resources from. This is just one of the actual what guys consoles. Another thing I want to show you under tools, I open DNS, expand, go to the zone. I see a lot of records. Look at all these folders because it's a domain control. Look how many times my zone got modified. You see that? But if I open the TCP folder, I can see it's a global catalog. Kerberos for authentication, LDAP, the protocol that Active Directory is based on. And it tells me it's actually pointing to server one. So server one is a domain controller. So from DNS, I can judge and see if a specific server is a domain controller or not. And look, these are the actual port numbers that we should actually know, right? 88, 464 for Kerberos, LDAP 389. There's actually a secure LDAP, which is 636, and 3268 is for the global catalog server itself. I only have server hosting Active Directory. That's kind of dangerous, right? Look at this. Let me just actually show you. So if I go to the yellow book and I go to domain controls, I only have one server hosting Active Directory. See that? This is not good. What I want to do is I want to at least have two servers hosting Active Directory just in case one fails. I have another one that is actually up and running. So we're going to see lots of things in more details. But for now, as you see, I was able to set up and install Active Directory on the first server itself. So we're finished with this actual lecture and we're going to continue with the same section, but we're going to use a different lecture in a moment. So we'll see you folks in a moment. All right, guys. Hello, folks. Welcome back. We're still on section 5, but this time I'm going to set up Active Directory on the second server so I could have a replica. That's what it's called. So when I set up Active Directory on like for a backup, it's called a replica, like an additional domain controller, just in case one domain controller crashes or fails. I have another one up and running. I can never depend just on one domain controller. I want to show you something first on server 1. So I'm going to go back to server 1. Let me just log on. So there's a console. I'm going to look at every console in details. But for now, look what it says here on the domain controllers. I only have one. And the name of the site. Do you remember from the first actual topic that we talked about? First actual like section. The site is a physical location, right? It's like an actual location itself. So and it's called default first site name. I don't want that. What I want to do is I want to go back to server manager and there's a console. Little by little, we're going to be covering all the consoles, sites and services, which means that's where I could manage the locations for the company, like headquarters, branch office, etc. How many locations does a company have? If a company only has one location, I'll never have to touch this. I like to rename the actual site. Look at this. Rename it to, let's say, New York. And I only have one domain controller in New York right now, as you see, right? Just one domain controller. So if I minimize this and I go back to the yellow book and refresh, right, I should see New York as a site. I could have also right click, choose properties, and I go back to NTDS settings right here. It's a global catalog server, as you see, right? And I can see it's a global catalog. not a domain controller. So there's a GC and a DC, and we will see the difference. Well, I only have one server, so I'm going to go to my second server. Remember, my second server is still a standalone server. It's a work group. It's not hosting Active Directory. So it has its own local database. So if I go to tools and I go to computer management, I want to test something with you guys here so you can actually see what's happening. And I check local users and groups and users, and I create a user. This time I'm going to call it user 100. All right. And let me put an actual password. And let me remove this check mark from the box. And I'm going to create a group and call it group 100. GRP 100. Add, and I'm going to put user 100 in the group and click on create. So this is actually the local machine itself. What I'm planning to do with this machine is to have it as an additional domain controller. So I'm going to go to manage. So this is actually for the same physical location, manage, add roles and features. And I'm going to go next. So same steps. I'm going to be installing the role Active Directory domain services. Next, next, and install. Right? So this should not actually take long. We still didn't have any clients. We didn't join anything to the domain. I'm just looking at the server side, how many domain controls to actually have. What is minimum per a location? And I'll tell you this, two, like two or more in case one fails, I have another one up and running. And it also depends how many users are you actually supporting in your company itself. I would not go more than 500 user accounts for the same DC. Imagine everybody at 8 in the morning, they're trying to process their logon. Look how much traffic you're sending, how much load is actually going to just one domain controller. That's why it's good to have multiple domain controllers, at least two. It's good for in case there's an actual disaster. One fails, I have another one actually up and running. So let's give this a moment. Of course, today you have also cloud service, which is Microsoft Azure, right? But you know what? Let me put it this way. Government agencies, financial institutions, they would more put a trust when it's actually on premises. It all depends, all right? So there is the cloud out there that can be hosting, doing the same work versus on premises where you have the actual servers inside your actual location itself. So this should be actually finishing up soon. And after this, I'm going to be promoting the server to a domain controller. So let's give it a few seconds. And this time you'll see it's going to be using a different option, right? A different option. It's not going to be a new forest, which means a new domain. No, it's going to be an additional domain controller, which means I am trying to set up an actual replica. All right. So whatever happens on DC1 is going to sync to DC2. So server one will sync to server two. I like to call them domain controllers, not servers, because they're actually hosting Active Directory, right? So this should be finishing in a few seconds. Let's see. There you go. Promote the server to a domain controller. And look, add a domain controller to an existing domain, right? That's what I need. Add a domain controller to an existing domain. For me to do this, I have to have full control to the domain. So I have to actually authenticate with a user account that is a member of which group. Let me just show you. We're going to be talking about groups. Watch this. So on the users, there's a group that is actually called the domain admins. If you're a member of this group, you have full control to the domain. Only administrator is a member of this group. We'll be managing users, but that's the user account that I'm actually authenticating with to set up a replica. Enterprise admins has full control to the entire forest. Okay, domain admins is just to the domain. So I'm going to go back to my second server and put the domain over here. I could say change, right? To specify the actual credentials itself. What is the name of the domain? Udemy.local. Look, add a domain controller to an existing domain, right? That's what I'm doing over here to an existing domain. I'm not setting up a new forest, guys. So we're not setting up like a new company or a new organization. That's not what we're actually doing. We're going to be setting up an actual replica, right? An actual replica itself. So this is going to be like an additional domain controller to the setup itself, right? What I could do, because this machine is actually a standalone server, so what I could actually do, I could go ahead and join it to the domain, like make sure it's actually a member server first. I could do that. I could actually skip that. I could just type over here, for example, Udemy dot local, and the credentials, which is Udemy slash administrator. That's the user account that we're actually using, all right? And I'm putting the actual password. I have domain admin rights to perform this actual function. Now, why do you think, let me look at a full screen. Why do you think I created some user accounts over here? I wanted to show you when I create some user accounts, I'm going to be losing them. Why will I be losing them? Because I'm trying to make this server the same as server one. So anything that is actually on the server will be actually gone. This is going to be deleted, right? And the group will be actually deleted. So just to, that's why I did this. On server one, when I was setting up a new forest, they got upgraded because it's going to that domain. All right. That's what I wanted to show you. And this is a worker machine, which means I don't have the sysvol, right? No NTDS folder, none of that, as you notice. So let me just go ahead and continue next. It should be able to find it. Look, am I going to be putting DNS on that server? I should have at least two DNS servers. For now, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to show you. And I'm not going to make it as a global catalog. It's going to be just a DC so I could see the differences between them. And the name of the site is New York. Read only is only for caching users' credentials. But for now, I don't want it to be a global catalog or a DNS. I want it to be just a domain control so you can see the difference. And the site is New York. It's in the same physical location. All right. And then we're going to compare them and see what is the difference between them. So I'm going to go next, replicate from any. I only have one, all right? So I could do that. Install from media, which means I could actually back up the database of Active Directory on a tape or external drive or a flash drive, and then restore from backup in case it's going from one physical location to another. But if it's in the same site, it could be going over the network. And I'm going to go next. And here's the database, location of it. Next, same thing. So as I said, I could be moving it somewhere else too, right? I'm going to leave it as a C drive. If I want, I could actually move this later. There's an actual command line that allows me to move the database, the sysvol, all these different tools to another location, let's say to another drive. It could be a RAID 1, it could be a RAID 5, right? So it could be any of that. But for now, I'm going to say, you know what? Let's leave it as the C Windows NTDS folder. That's where I want to actually leave everything by default. So that's a default location. That's where I always look if it's a domain controller or not. Civil, which again, remember, contains the group policy objects. NTDS is a database. Remember, it's called .dit. Directory information tree will be backing up the database of Active Directory. So this is something that we'll be actually doing. Okay, just to let you know. So I'm going to leave it as it is, and I'm just going to go next, and see how this works for us. And install. This is not going to take long. So it's changing membership because it's going to become a domain controller, right? I'm going to start noticing something here. So when I go to my first server, when I go to domain control, I only see one. If I refresh, it's not going to say GC. It will say DC. Oh, there you go. You see that? So it's actually under the domain controls. Oh, you remember, this is an organizational unit, not a container. We'll see the differences between them. So when I open domain controls, I could see which servers are hosting Active Directory. I could even go to sites and services, refresh my site, which is New York, and expand servers. Now I have two. So this is a good sign. It looks like the other one is restarting. Let me take a look. There you go. It's finished. The database is kind of small. Not much had to be actually synced from one to another. And guess what, guys? This is not going to take a while. And we'll see why. I'm going to explain why the first server took around like 5 to 10 minutes to process login, where the second one didn't. We'll see that later on in the course. So this is about to restart the system. So now my second server is an additional domain controller, which means, yes, it is. It's hosting Active Directory. So whatever happens on DC1 replicates to DC2. Whatever happens on DC2 replicates to DC1. So they replicate to each other, right? So it's actually sitting there as a backup. But guess what? There is a big difference between them. And you know what? When you actually get on an interview and somebody tells you what is the difference between two domain controls or two global catalog servers that belong to the same domain, if you know the right answer, that means you know exactly how Active Directory works. How does it work behind the scenes? Okay, because you can't just say, you know what, whatever happens on DC1 happens on DC2. If DC1 crashes, but it can continue working normally because I still have DC2, which is my replica, which is my additional domain control. And guess what? That's not actually right. And we'll see why, because there is a big difference between DC1 and DC2, something in terms of GC, DC, and something we're going to be introducing, which is called the FSMO roles, which stands for, flexible single master operations. And there's actually five of them. And we'll see what each one is. Those are like the engines of Active Directory. See, what I'm planning to do first is just to work with the structure of the domain controller itself, like just Active Directory itself. Then we'll be concerned about the computers and all that that is part of the domain. Let me minimize this and go back to server one and see. So this one is fully done. Let me just see. There you go. It has to actually get the replication partner, right? So they're going to be getting it from each other. So when I right click over here and I could do change domain controller, I only see server one. I don't see the other server. So the other server is still in the process of finishing installing. Then it's going to go ahead and actually restart. Look at this. Under computers, I have nothing, which means I don't have any machines that are part of the domain. Under users, I only have group one and user one. I'm not going to see user 100 and group 100. Those will actually be deleted, by the way. So that's just something to keep in mind. They're going to be deleted. This should be restarting soon. Yes. Okay. Let me just show you one last thing. Let me just see if I could see both screens at the same time. To get actually see, and let me go back to server one over here. So if I open DNS, and look, I'm going to refresh. And guess what? These will be refreshed. Now it's going to tell me, well, guess what? You actually have another server that is hosting Active Directory, right? So let me just check. Looks like, yeah, it's about to do it. So I could actually go ahead and just restart. This should actually be fine, right? Give it a few seconds and it should be back to normal. As you see, it looks like it's restarting, right? So now it's going to start talking to the other server itself. So it's going to be talking to who? It's going to be talking to server one. Now, these records will be refreshed. So I'm going to be refreshing over here, and I'm going to see that these records will be actually syncing. So I'm going to see other records for server two. So I'm going to see the number two. But guess what? I'm not going to see it for GC. I'm going to see it for Kerberos, for K password, and also LDAP. So I'll be seeing for, but I'm not going to see it for the rest of them because it's not actually a global catalog server. Remember that? It's not an actual GC. So that's one thing to keep in mind. There you go. It's restarting. So it's just going to take a few seconds until it processes the logons and all that. And this should actually refresh soon enough. All right. So let's give it a moment and we can see. Like at the beginning, yes, it does take a while for things to process. But then after that, things will actually start moving much faster. I'm just gonna check and see over here if it actually synced or not. Because if I did everything right, I'm gonna see three more records for my second server, guys. Right? Let me just take a look. There you go. So this is actually working. It's spinning as you see. So it's actually on the right track. So that's good. It's just the first time when it restarts, it takes a while to process. But I'm going to show you because right now I only have one DNS server. So I can be in trouble, guys. I could actually be in trouble. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Let's see if it's processing the logon and see how this actually works for us. So it's actually getting there. Let me just take a look. As long as it says applying computer settings and all that, that means everything is actually running smooth. Everything will actually be fine. So let's just keep that in mind. So at least right now, I actually have two domain controllers. One of them is a GC and the other one is a DC. And we're going to see the differences between them. And I actually did this on purpose, guys. All right, just to let you know, this is actually done on purpose. Let me take a look and see back on server one. There you go. Look, remember what I told you? LDAP for server two. K password for server two. Purpose for, but GC, no, because it's only a domain controller. All right. Okay. Well, under domain controls, I see both of them over here. Let me just refresh and GC and DC. So if I try to change, do I see the other one? No, it's still not syncing. That's fine. How about here? The replication partners. We'll be seeing this. So I should be seeing the partners of each one of them. It's going to take a while for at the beginning for initial replication. So you'll see that. So it's applying computer settings. This is actually good. Let me just make sure I could log in, and I want to open Active Directory using the computers and just show you what's actually there. I'm going to be losing the local accounts that I created on this server because I made this server exactly the same thing as the first server. So the database is going to be syncing, but whatever's actually on this server will actually be lost. It should not be in the list itself. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Just at the beginning is going to take a while. Just the first time, as you see, is going to take a while to process the logon. So what it's actually doing is going to check with servers. That's authentication protocol that's going to be using. So you dummy, this is a good sign. And let me just go ahead and log on. The protocol that is used is called Kerberos to verify the username and the password. Protocol that Active Directory is based on is actually called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which is port what, 389. It's actually good to know port numbers, especially if they have to actually pass through a firewall, right? So let's keep that in mind. All right, so this is good. I'm just waiting for my server manager. That's what I'm waiting for. Server manager. Let's see how this actually works for us. Let's see. So it should get populated automatically since it's actually a domain controller. And then after that, on a new section, we'll be comparing both and see more and more details about both of these domain controls. One of them is a DC and the other one is actually what, guys? A GC. Remember that? I could check that from here. All right. I could check that from server one. So watch this. One of them is a GC and the other one is a DC. Let me take a look and see sites. If these partners got replicated. No, not yet. This takes a while. That's actually fine. How about if I try to change the main controller? Do I see? No, not yet. It's still getting processed. That's actually normal, guys. Okay, that's normal. So let me just see. This is just taking a while at the beginning to log in and process the logon itself. Right. So it should be coming soon up and running. At the beginning, initial replication does actually take a while, right? That's one thing to keep in mind. And there's actually a profile for a new firewall, which is actually for the domain that I want to actually see. And probably I actually have to turn that off. So I should see Server Manager in a few seconds, right? So that's something to keep in mind. I tried that not to make speed things up so you guys don't have to pause the video and go back and see what I just did. So it does make things easier for yourself, right? That's why I keep on checking. I like to check and see, right? So this one, I should see server manager right now. This is my second server, right? So it is getting processed. So we don't actually go that fast. If I'm taking the class, I don't feel like I want to pause all the time and see how these actually work for us. Let me just take a look and see. I should see ADDS. I should not see DNS. That's what I wanted to show you. I should not see DNS in the list. But I could do this. I could open users and computers. Watch this now, right? And this time you're going to start realizing, oh, I'm not going to see that actual local account that I was actually referring to. I lost that account. Remember, because I'm trying to make server 2 exactly like server 1, but server 2 is actually a domain controller. It's not a global catalog. So look, it tells me over here which one I'm actually connected to, which is server 2. If I expand and I go to domain controllers, I see both 1 and 2. 2 is a DC. If I go to users, I'm not going to see that user account, which is user 100. See, it's gone and group 100 is gone because I made server 2 as server 1, right? And same thing, if I go to tools, I don't see DNS. There's no DNS here. That could be a problem. But if I go to sites and services, right? I just want to make sure that at this section, we actually finished our second server, which is a replica. You can see the exact same thing. The location is New York, and I have both of my actual servers. I have server 1, right? And I have, look, see, this is what I was waiting for. This is the partner, and server two's partner is server 1. So, and this is good. That's why it took a while to process at the beginning. This is perfect. So as you see, we're done with this actual section. And now our next section, guys, we'll be looking at the differences between both of these domain controls, the DC and the DC, FISMA roles, DNS, and all that. All right. So we'll see you guys in a moment. All right, guys, then in a moment, we'll continue on with the process.